So progression happens throughout the story, and it's connected by the sequences. Characters launch out in plots and subplots and battle the forces of antagonism. The story is only going to be interesting by how well your protagonist and your characters counteract the antagonism. So nothing moves a story forward more than battling the forces of those conflicts. One piece of conflict defeated after the other until a satisfying resolution happens. So let's talk about the 5 main parts of story structure. And as we start, remember, there's no wrong way to do this, okay? These are just great ideas. Number 1 is the beginning. Who are all the main characters in your story? And let's introduce them to our audience within the first 25% of the story, whether it's a screenplay or a novel. Are there exceptions? Yes. But the best-selling novels and the best-selling movies had these components, these common threads. All of your main characters, the antagonists, the protagonists, we've already been introduced to them and we're getting to know them within the first 25% of the story. Number 2, and this will happen within the first 20 to 25% of the story. Some people say 15%, but I've learned from experience, if you just do it within Act 1, within the first 25%, you should be fine. And that is the inciting incident. And it's something that we've already discussed. Remember, Indiana Jones gets the phone call, hey, the mummy's been stolen from the museum in Cairo, what are we gonna do? And now Indiana Jones has to make a decision. Number 3, the crisis. And this happens around the 75% mark. Before the last 25% of your story, whether it's novel or screenplay, around the 75% mark, this is what happens. The crisis happens and we could end the story right there if we wanted to, but something else takes place and now we have this last 25% to wrap things up and end the story well. The example that I want to use that I love the most is Mission Impossible from 1996, starring Tom Cruise. And I'm going to read this to you. Ethan finds Jim alive and lets Jim know that he's been caught, especially since Ethan is wearing those eyeglasses with a built-in camera for everyone at Langley to know the truth behind all that's happened. And that is, Jim has been behind everything. Now, Mission Impossible could end there. But Jim shoots Claire beside Ethan. And then he runs and jumps on top of the train to try to escape via a helicopter. And his journey in trying to escape the train and get on the helicopter with Ethan close behind him and chasing him, that's Act 3. The movie could have ended, Jim's been exposed, he shoots Claire, and then he leaves. It could have ended right there. But we have another 25% to wrap things up and give the audience a satisfying conclusion. Number 4, the climax. This is the event that ends Act 3. In Mission Impossible, Ethan kills Jim and the helicopter pilot, and he barely escapes the helicopter blade from severing his head off. Ethan's the hero, and it was a great climax. But number 5 is the last component, and that's the resolution. You let the audience relax and celebrate the great story. In Mission Impossible, Ethan reunites with one of his teammates. They celebrate each other and a mission accomplished. They survived all the conflict, evil came to an end, things were put to rights, and now they can celebrate. You see this in Lord of the Rings also. At the very end, Frodo and the other halflings come home, they're heroes, and they have a big celebration. The ending of a great story is giving the audience what they want, but not in the way they expect. And I've learned from experience, it's not always just about giving them what they want, but it's about providing a satisfying ending. You always want to try to give the audience what they want. But if you decide to create a story that at least has a satisfying ending, in a way you're giving the audience what they want. In The Bridges of Madison County, she is married to a good guy. They've been married for 30 years or longer, and the marriage is kind of stale. You've been with the same person for 30 years. So she has a choice. She can run off with a photographer that she's fallen in love with and get caught by her husband and probably ostracized by her family and hated by her kids. And when you're reading that story and watching the film, that's how you expect the story is going to end up. So how did the writer create a story that left such a satisfying ending? Well, she has the affair with the photographer. She's reminded of what it's like to be immensely desired, to be appreciated in a new way, to be reminded of how wonderful and how fresh the feeling of in love is. But she ends up not going away with him and staying there with her husband and her family. She bid the photographer farewell and she never forgot him and she loved him. but she decided to fulfill her duty and stay home and continue being the cornerstone of her family. Her husband never finds out about his wife's short-lived love affair. The ending was realistic, it was satisfying, and we respect her for staying, for expressing her love and loyalty to her family. The ending was gratifying, and it ended in a way we did not expect. You also hear a lot about raise the stakes, raise the stakes. You're not raising the stakes enough in your story. Well, what do they mean by that? If the hero isn't risking more to lose, then what's so great about the story? The hero risks losing everything, and the antagonist is fierce. And over and over and over, he or she, the hero, encounters barriers after barriers and is attacked by people who love them the most. And then in the end, when they are victorious, what a satisfying story. What a wonderful story to get behind. In Field of Dreams, there's even a part in the story where his most trusted, loved person begins to question the sanity of their decisions. And that's Ray Kinsella's wife in Field of Dreams. In his darkest hour, the person who has been loyal to him and loves him and has been there for him and defending him and rooting for him begins to question things herself. His daughter ends up choking because they're at this fictional baseball game and she chokes on a hot dog and she almost dies. He almost loses his own daughter. The farmer is already at stake. They think that they're going to lose the farm and therefore lose their livelihood and become homeless. The town already disrespects him. He doesn't have any of the respect from anybody, any of his neighbors, anybody in the town. Nobody's going to come to his rescue. And now his life partner, his wife, is questioning, and he almost loses his daughter's life. Talk about going through the fire, man. Now, I'm going to read you something that I've written about this, and I know how difficult it is to tell a story worth reading, and I know how difficult it is to make a movie worth watching. So I don't want you to misinterpret me and think that I'm knocking these creators. The fact that they even were able to make a good movie, if they had made a bad movie, they still accomplished a great feat. It is extremely difficult to put a movie together because you're relying on cast and crew, everybody working together at the same time, and you don't run out of money, and there has to be investors to invest in to get the movie to be made. There are so many moving parts. So I'm not knocking these creators, but I do want to use this as an example of when the stakes are not raised high enough and how that can affect the story, okay? I won't mention the name of the film because I don't want to come across as someone who's attacking it. So we'll just call it the Salinger movie. So J.D. Salinger's family, they're actually pretty well off financially. They're not stinking filthy rich, but they're not poor. If he hadn't went to college to become a writer, he would have just went back to his hometown, to his family, and continued selling meat and cheese for the company. What's so bad and dehumanizing about having to go home and work for the family company? Now, if they were living in a slum and had no money and his dad's health was bad, and if J.D. Salinger wasn't successful with his novel, his dad wasn't going to get the medical attention that he needed. Now, that's raising the stakes. That's a better story. And I understand the argument. That's not what happened. It's a biopic. It's about his life. But if it had been me, I would have tried to find something that if he was not successful in writing that book, if he was not a successful writer, what else was there going on in his life that he was facing that was horrendous? And as my grandfather used to say, be compassionate toward people because we're either about to enter a storm, we're inside a storm, or we just left a storm. And even though the writers might not have known of something, some major source of conflict in J.D. Salinger's life, I would have kept digging until I found something. The fact that if he doesn't make it as a writer, he has to go home and work a job where in today's time in the year 2023, he would have been making six figures. I don't feel sorry for somebody in that situation. That's not somebody that I'm going to really root behind. Now, if the story had emphasized his struggle through life, if maybe they didn't even talk about the relationship with his dad, they talked about the trauma he experienced in the World War. Now, that would have been interesting. He develops PTSD. He's been in such a bad place mentally that his family doesn't want anything to do with him. And all he has is that book. And if he doesn't write that book and find meaning and purpose in his life, he's going to remain in that mental institution for the rest of his life. Now we're talking. Now that's interesting. And those components were in that film, But what brought the stakes down was a good relationship with his dad, who was well off financially. He had a good relationship with his mom. They were both still together. It was a happy home in the film. The money would have been there if he had failed. Me as a creator, I would have left that part out. I would have just shown his struggle with the war, the PTSD, and his family wants nothing to do with him anymore because he's pushed them away. He's attacked them verbally because of his PTSD. He's toxic. They can't handle him anymore, even though they love him. They've had to set healthy boundaries on him. And if he does not write that book and if it does not become successful, he's going to spend the rest of his life in that psychiatric ward. Now that would have been interesting. And you might say, well, it was based on a true story. Well, it was a biopic. It's about his life. Well, then call it based on a true story and leave stuff out and make the story good. It's about entertainment anyways. If you want to make a biography on somebody, make a documentary, not a feature film. And I'm not trying to be mean, okay? I'm just offering my opinions on these things. A lot of fiction was created for the movie Rudy, and that was supposed to be based on a true story. It wasn't a biopic on Rudy Rudiger, but it was based on a true story, and it was one of the most successful sports movies of all time. For one, in the true story, Rudy's brother never dated Rudy's girlfriend. From what I gather, they made up quite a bit. But what a great story it was. Let's use an example of someone we can get behind. Luke Skywalker. The Imperial forces come in and kill his entire family, and he has nobody. Obi-Wan Kenobi, his mentor, knows that Luke has the Force, though Luke doesn't understand it yet. Obi-Wan knows that Luke is capable, and Luke wants to fight back. He wants to join the rebel forces and fight the evil imperialist army. His whole family's been wiped out, and he could get killed also. And if they don't stop the Imperial Army, they could destroy the entire world. They've already destroyed the planet of Alderaan. The Death Star destroyed an entire planet, and Luke is going to go up against them. Now that is raising the stakes. If Luke fails, the entire known world will be under the dominion of the Imperialist Army. And they are brutal, they're murderous, they're ruthless. Now that's raising the stakes. Let's give another example of raising the stakes. This is in a purely fictional movie, Training Day, the year 2001, with Denzel Washington and Ethan Hawke. If Denzel's character, Alonzo, does not get the $1 million for the Russian mafia, he'll be executed because after all, he killed one of their family members. If Alonzo fails, he dies. Ethan, the good cop, tries to intervene because Alonzo is going to stop at nothing to get that money for the Russian mafia. For Ethan Hawke's character, he keeps getting in the way of Alonzo and Alonzo keeps trying to get him killed. Ethan could die from this. The stakes were raised for both stories.